On our side of the parish, people don't like to talk too long about the blue hole. They will mention it quick. They will point toward the river if they have to. They will warn children not to wander there after sunset. Because once you start speaking about the thing in that water, it starts to feel like the water is listening. The blue hole sat deep inside a bend of the river, where the current slowed and the banks widened like the mouth of something waiting to swallow. The rest of the river was familiar to us. Men bathed there. Women washed clothes upstream. Boys swam in the shallows and dove from overhanging roots. But the blue hole was different. The water there looked wrong. Even in broad daylight, it was too dark. Not muddy dark. Not shadow dark. Bottomless dark. The old people used to say that part of the river had no floor. That it opened into some deep tunnel under the earth, a place where drowned things drifted and never came back up. They said fish went in and returned changed. They said cows that fell in were never found. They said, some nights, when the moon was thin and weak, you could hear a wet dragging sound coming from that bank, like something huge pulling itself half out of the water, then sliding back in before anyone could see. Most people laughed those stories off. At least, they did before the fisherman tried to catch it. The first person to see it and live long enough to tell it proper was an old fisherman named Elias Grant. Elias was not the kind of man to scare easy. He had spent his whole life on the river. He knew every shallow crossing, every eel nest, every snagged tree trunk under the surface. If a boat tilted, he could tell by the pull of the current what was caught beneath it. If fish were schooling, he could smell them before he saw them. So when Elias came back to the village shaking like a fevered man, everybody listened. He said it happened just before sunrise. He and his brother, Nathan, had gone out in a narrow wooden boat with nets and hooks, hoping to catch enough fish to sell by afternoon. The river was quiet. No wind. No birdsong. Nothing but the soft dip of paddle against water. They drifted near the blue hole because Elias said big fish sometimes circled the edges there, though no sane man cast directly into the middle. Nathan had just baited a line when the river surface in front of them bulged upward. Not splashed. Bulged. As if something underneath had risen so close to the surface that the water itself stretched over its back like skin. Then the shape moved. A long ridge slid under the black water, circling their boat once. Elias said it was too large to be any fish he knew, too smooth to be a crocodile, too silent to be anything natural. Nathan leaned over with the pole, trying to stir the water, and that was when the thing opened one eye beneath the surface. One eye. Big as a dinner plate. Cloudy blue. Human-looking. Watching him. Nathan screamed and dropped the pole into the river. The bulge vanished. The current shook once. Then the boat pitched so hard both men nearly fell overboard. They paddled back without a single fish. When Elias told the story, some men said it was a river spirit. Others said he had seen a giant catfish distorted by the water. A few laughed and asked him how much rum he'd had before sunrise. Elias didn't argue. He only said this. That thing in the blue hole know when you watching it, and it watching back. For a few weeks, nobody went near the place. Then curiosity did what fear could not. It brought men back. The river had always fed the village, and fishermen are not people who like to leave mystery alone. The more the story spread, the bigger the thing became in men's minds. Some said if it was real, it must be worth a fortune. Others said catching it would bring fame. A few claimed they wanted to prove, once and for all, that there was nothing supernatural in that water. That was how the first serious attempt was made. There were 6 of them that day. Elias refused to go, but his brother Nathan joined, along with 4 younger men from the next district over. They brought hooks thick as iron nails, braided rope, chain, and a length of steel cable borrowed from a machine yard. 2 boats went out together and anchored on opposite sides of the blue hole while the men baited a monstrous hook with goat meat and blood. People gathered on the bank to watch. By then the whole village knew. The sun was high. Children climbed trees for a better view. Women crossed themselves and told the men to leave that water alone. The men only laughed harder because that is what men do when they are afraid and want nobody to know. They dropped the bait. For a long time, nothing happened. The river looked dead. Then, without warning, both boats lurched at once. Not drifted. The men on the bank began shouting. The boats twisted toward the center of the blue hole as if something below had swallowed the hook and started swimming straight down. One of the fishermen wrapped the cable around a wooden cleat and braced his feet, yelling for the others to hold. The river churned. Bubbles the size of coconuts burst at the surface. Then the water rose. That was the part nobody ever forgot. The water rose. Not from rain. Not from flood upstream. Right there, around the blue hole, the river lifted as if the whole center of it was swelling upward. The banks disappeared under sudden surges. Muddy water rushed into the grass. People ran back from the edge, screaming as the level climbed and climbed, higher than anyone had ever seen it outside hurricane season. And in the middle of that rising water, something began to surface. First came the head. Dear God! It looked like a fish, yes, but only in the cruelest sense of the word. Its skull was broad and pale, almost white-blue like the belly of a dead thing left too long in moonlight. The skin was slick and half-transparent in places, showing dark veins moving beneath it. Its mouth was too wide, ringed with tiny needle teeth that continued deep into its throat. Strands of riverweed hung from its face like rotten hair. Its gills flared open and shut, and every time they opened, a sound came out, not a hiss, not a growl, but something like a person trying to scream underwater. And the eyes. Those eyes were wrong. Human eyes. Miserable eyes. Angry eyes. The creature came half out of the water, twisting, and people saw that its body was impossibly long. Longer than either boat. Thick through the middle like a drowned horse bloated in the sun, but scaled in patches that reflected blue and silver when the light hit them. Behind it whipped a tail powerful enough to crack the river surface like a gunshot. The men on the boat shouted in triumph and terror all at once. They had it. The hook was lodged somewhere near the jaw. The cable held. The 2 boats strained backward from opposite ends, and inch by inch they dragged the thing toward the shallows while the river boiled around them. Then it turned its head. Nathan later said the creature looked directly at each man, one by one, like it was memorizing them. Then the tail came. One sweep. Just one. The tail hit the side of Nathan's boat with such force the entire craft jumped sideways. A spray of splintered wood and bloody spit burst into the air. One fisherman, a man called Joel, was struck full in the mouth by the tail's bony edge. Every tooth in his top jaw came out. Not loosened. Not broken. Torn clean from the gum. He fell backward, shrieking, both hands to his face as blood poured between his fingers. The others lost their grip. One man jumped overboard in panic and nearly drowned before people on shore hauled him out. The cable burned through another man's palms. The hook tore free with a wet ripping sound that several witnesses said they heard in their nightmares for years after. The creature slammed back into the blue hole. The rising water dropped all at once. The boat spun loose. And the river went still, so still it looked as if nothing had ever happened. Only Joel's teeth scattered in the bottom of the boat said otherwise. After that day, nobody called it a big fish anymore. They called it a Duppy creature. A river ghost. The blue hole devil. And though plenty of men swore they would return better prepared, something had changed in the village. It was not just fear of the river now. It was fear of what had noticed us. Joel never smiled again. He survived, but from that day onward he kept his mouth hidden behind a cloth whenever he spoke. He refused to sleep alone. He said every time he closed his eyes he heard water sliding across his floorboards. He said he would wake at midnight to find his bedroom damp, though no rain had fallen and every window was shut. Some mornings there were fish scales on his pillow. Other mornings muddy handprints appeared on the wall beside his bed, though nobody in that house had gone near the river. Then his wife started hearing knocking under the floor. Not on the door. Not at the window. Under the floor. 3 knocks every night at the same time. When Joel lifted the loose boards to look beneath the house, he found wet reed stuffed into the crawl space and a stench like spoiled river flesh. He moved his family out 2 days later. He was not the only one. Nathan began hearing splashing outside his home every evening just after dark. He lived nowhere near the river, but still the sound came closer each night, as if shallow water were being stirred just beyond his yard. One night he stepped outside with a lantern and saw a trail of slime leading from the road to his doorstep. The lantern flame went blue in his hand. On the wood of the door, scratched deep into the paint, were 4 long marks. And pressed between them, a single scale, wet and shining. Nathan left before dawn. The others followed in their own ways. One man dreamed he was drowning every night until he stopped sleeping altogether. Another found dead fish arranged in a circle around his bed. One woke to see his mosquito net hanging low over his face, soaked and dripping, as though it had been dragged through the river and spread over him while he slept. Every person who had helped try to haul that creature out began to suffer. Lights flickered. Water taps hissed mud. Dogs barked at empty corners. Children cried and pointed at the ceiling, saying something wet was crawling overhead at night. It got so bad that the village priest came to bless 3 of the homes. He sprinkled holy water and read from scripture room by room. While he prayed in Joel's abandoned house, people waiting outside heard a violent thrashing from within, followed by a sound like a body being dragged across the floor. The priest came out pale as paper and refused to speak about what he saw. He only said the house should remain empty. And it did. For years. But fear has a short memory where pride is concerned. As time passed, new men came up hearing only pieces of the story. The river still held fish. The blue hole still tempted them. Older villagers warned them, but youth always thinks old people exaggerate. And every now and then, when money was short and mouths were many, some desperate fisherman would say, "It is only a creature. Everything that lives can be caught." Those were the words that ruined the last crew. This was many years after the first attempt, when engines had replaced paddles on some of the boats. A group of 4 men from a neighboring town came with heavier gear, metal winches, harpoons, floodlights, and the arrogance of men who had not grown up with the stories. They laughed when people told them about water rising on command. They laughed when warned about the hauntings. They laughed when Elias, now a bent old man, told them never to cast into the center. "We are not afraid of ghost fish," one of them said. Elias answered, "Then you should be afraid of your own foolishness." That night the men set out anyway. Some boys hid in the bushes to watch. That is how we know what happened, because only one of those fishermen was seen again, and he returned insane. The boys said the men anchored just before moonrise and shone floodlights into the blue hole. The light went down into the water and seemed to vanish after a few feet, swallowed by the dark. They baited the lines, laughed, cursed, drank from bottles, and waited. Then the engine on one boat died. Then the floodlight on the other boat burst. Then the river began to move. The boys said the water did not ripple from one place outward. The whole surface quivered at once, as though the blue hole was breathing. A mist rose off the water though the night was warm. The men stood up, suddenly nervous now, calling to each other across the dark. That was when something bumped one of the boats from beneath. Then again. Then harder. One man shone a handheld torch into the water and screamed. The boys ran home before they could see more, but the village heard the rest. We heard men shouting. We heard engines trying and failing to start. We heard a long metallic shriek, like cable under impossible strain. Then came a sound that stopped every person in the village cold. Laughter. Wet laughter. Not from a man. Not from a woman. Something else. Something trying to copy us. By sunrise, one boat had washed downstream upside down. The other was found snagged in roots half a mile away, split open along the side as if something giant had peeled it apart. There was blood inside, but no bodies. Only one fisherman staggered out of the cane field that afternoon, barefoot and bleeding, eyes so wide they looked ready to burst. He kept repeating the same words, "It came walking." People tried to calm him, but he bit one man's hand and started screaming again. It came walking out the water. He never explained more than that in any clear way. Sometimes he said the thing had arms. Sometimes he said it dragged itself on fins like elbows. Sometimes he swore its face changed, becoming the faces of drowned people they had known. Eventually his family took him far away. Last anyone heard, he still refused to go near rivers, bathtubs, rain barrels, even buckets full of water. After that, nobody tried to catch it again. Not truly. Still, the sightings never stopped. Fishermen would cast near the upper bends and find their lines cut clean in the night. Nets came back torn from inside, as if something trapped within had shredded its way out. Canoes were discovered at dawn filled with water though they had been pulled high and dry. Sometimes, if you stood near the blue hole at sunset, you could see circles widening across the surface with nothing visible beneath them. And some mornings strange marks appeared in the mud, half fin, half hand, with long grooves where claws or bones had dragged. The river itself changed mood around that place. There were days it flowed gentle and clear, until a stranger stepped too close, and then the water would begin to swell and thicken, pushing against the banks as if warning them back. Old women said the creature no longer needed to show itself. It had become part of the river now. Or maybe the river had become part of it. As for Elias, he lived longer than anyone expected. In his last years, when his eyes had gone cloudy and his back had curled, children would still sit on the veranda and ask him if the Blue Hole River monster was real. He always answered the same way. If it wasn't real, why people still leaving? At first, the children would laugh because they didn't understand. Then one by one they learned. A family moved into Joel's old house once, not knowing its history. Before a month had passed, they fled after waking to find all the kitchen chairs turned to face the back door, dripping with river water. Another man built a little shop along the road and bragged that village superstitions could not frighten him. A week later he closed it for good after hearing splashing beneath the concrete floor every night. A schoolteacher renting nearby claimed she saw a pale face looking up at her from the toilet bowl and left the parish the same day. Always the same pattern. First mockery. Then signs. Then terror. Then departure. No one who truly got the creature's attention stayed long. That is why, even now, people who know the story do not fish the Blue Hole after dark. Some don't go near it at all. I wish I could tell you the story ends there, buried in the past, good only for frightening children and entertaining outsiders. I wish I could say the creature remains in that river and that is where all danger stops. But the truth is, some stories do not end when the telling ends. They wait. I learned that for myself the night my uncle disappeared. My uncle Desmond was not a fisherman by trade, but he loved the river. He said the old stories were good for keeping fools respectful of nature, nothing more. One dry season, when the river had pulled back from the banks and the blue hole looked smaller than ever, he decided to prove to everybody that fear had exaggerated the place. He went alone at dusk with a lantern and a line. By midnight he had not returned. At first the family thought he had gone drinking with friends. By morning, when his slippers were found by the riverbank and his lantern floating near the reeds, we knew something else had happened. The search party found no body. Only his fishing line. It was tied to a root as if he had secured it there, but the hook at the end was bent open. Around the line were wrapped strands of silver cable, old and rusted, the same kind used years before in that first attempt to pull the creature from the water. Nobody knew how that cable got there. We had not seen it in decades. My grandmother started praying the moment she saw it. She said the creature had returned what belonged to it. She said Desmond had disturbed something that remembered being hurt. After that, strange things came to our house. Not to the whole village. To us. Water on the kitchen floor every morning though the roof did not leak. A smell like rotting weeds in the hallway after sunset. My little cousin waking at night, crying that a fish with people eyes was staring through the window. We heard dragging sounds on the back step. Once, when my mother opened the door after hearing knocking, she found a heap of fresh river snails writhing on the mat. And always the sound of water. Water where there should be none. I stayed there 3 nights before I saw it for myself. It was past 2 in the morning. The house had gone quiet. I woke because I heard soft tapping at the window by my bed. At first I thought it was rain. Then I realized the taps came in a pattern. Slow. Patient. Fingertip taps. I turned and looked. At the glass, from outside, something pale was pressed against the pane. Not a whole face. Just one eye. Round. Blue. Human. Looking in. I could not move. The eye blinked once, slowly, and as it blinked I saw water trickle down the outside wall though the night was dry and still. And that is why I tell this story the way it was told to me, the way it happened to those who tried to make a prize out of something that should have been left alone. Laugh if you want. Say it was mass fear, river fever, superstition, giant catfish, anything that helps you sleep. Maybe that is wiser. But if you ever visit a lonely river and the locals warn you about a dark blue hole where the water looks bottomless, listen. If fishermen tell you there is a ghost creature down there that once took 2 boats and steel cable just to drag half its body into the light, listen. If they tell you it can raise the river water when angered, listen. If they tell you one man lost every tooth from a single strike of its tail, listen. And if they tell you that nobody who tries to catch it keeps peace in their home afterward, that knocking starts under the floor, that wet footprints appear in locked rooms, that families end up fleeing in the night. Then do not ask for proof. Do not cast a line. Do not shine a light into the center of that water. Because some creatures are not just animals. Some are grudges made flesh. Some live in holes too deep for sunlight. And somewhere, even now, under the black skin of that river, the blue hole river monster is turning slowly in the dark, waiting for the next fool to tug on the line.